I'm going to go ahead and open with a revelation. While I love Japanese RPGs, I've always struggled to get into strategy RPGs. I can't really explain why. It seems like something I would really love, but everyone I have ever picked up to play just didn't really connect with me. Well, all except one. Front Mission 3 captured me in a way that I cannot really express in words. I love mecha, in particular the realistic style and the genre, something like Gundam. The setting and fictional political struggle immediately had me hooked. I have since replayed and beaten the game at least 5 times, and I was excited to take a look at the other games in the series. Was it a one-hit wonder for me? Or is there more down this rabbit hole than I could have ever imagined? It always starts with a dream, right? Toshiro Tsuchida, having just left Masaya, a Japanese developer during the early 90s, where he had served as producer on a few games that likely inspired much of the company's seminal work. Influences like Assault Suits Vulcan, a side-scrolling mech game, and gameplay influences like Wanzers, a strategy RPG. Toshiro had an idea of a new game, but his company G-Craft needed capital to make that idea reality. In 1993, he approached Square for funding. Square was initially skeptical of the idea, their usually fare being Final Fantasy games. They were intimidated by the mecha influence. The idea was definitely outside of their wheelhouse, and during the industry climate of the time, they were reluctant to take too many risks. But Toshiro persisted, and a deal was struck in the fall of 1993, which resulted in the release of Front Mission for the Super Famicom. In the world of Front Mission, wars of the near future are fought in mechs called Wanzers, or Wanzers. This term is an amalgam of 2 German words, Wanderpanzer, or walking tank. It is a turn-based tactical RPG with a linear-based story progression. Cutscenes, character portraits, and text boxes move the plot along between battles, which play out in a variety of environments. These play out similar to digital-style comic pages, with dialogue choices that may, depending on the entry, change the plot to varying levels. One innocuous choice could produce a whole different scenario for the story. Wanzers are customizable, and there are a variety of weapons to choose from. They fall into 4 categories based on range, and each limb and body segment on the mech has its own stats and life bars. Indeed, the mechs are fully customizable for sure, as arms can be swapped out differently from left to right, legs can be chosen based on different types of terrain, etc., etc. In fact, it'd be quite intimidating just how much freedom you have to build what you want, provided you have the resources, i.e. money. Every numbered entry in the series is connected to each other, although usually not directly. In the first game, you play as Lloyd Clive, who is a member of the OCU military, short for Oceanic Cooperative Union. That's a political faction, and of which there are many in this particular world. The story starts out pretty hard as Lloyd is investigating another political faction's facilities. His platoon is ambushed and his fiancée seemingly is killed. To make matters worse, his squad is blamed for initiating of hostilities, and war erupts between the 2 factions on Hoffman Island. Lloyd must cut through the government cover-up on both sides to uncover the truth and end the madness of war. Beyond the mecha influences, the near-future setting might be one of the series' greatest strengths. Politicians are the real enemies in these games, as they vie for power and influence, not caring who they kill or maim in the process. It is the soldiers caught in the madness of those wicked men who shines as the heroes in these games. The mood of the game is dark. The world of Front Mission is a gritty and repressed place, but enough light-hearted character moments are included to make the world seem bearable. Other big draws are the level of customization, which makes the games very replayable, coupled with the intrigue, political drama played out in the background behind these very human characters. The game has been remade twice, first for the PlayStation in Japan, and then for the DS, and more recently, a 3rd time, for the Switch. So it's very accessible if you want to give it a go. So what do I think of the game? Well, as previously stated, I love the 3rd entry, and the DNA of what makes it great is here. However, there's some core ideas that have yet to appear. For instance, the grid display for movement is here, but the red grid for attacking is not present in the older version of this game. This can make it more tedious to plan your attacks until you learn the firing patterns of each weapon. The touchscreen options for the DS version smooth out the gameplay some, making for a faster experience. However, it still can feel very slow and tedious to play. The story grips me, but the gameplay needs an update for modern sensibilities. Unfortunately, the 3D remake on the Switch does not seem to address any of these elements. This game needed more than just a 3D coat of paint to make it stand out, but unfortunately that seems to be all that it got. The battles just drag on, and you don't really have any options for speeding things up. Also, unlike later entries, the main protagonist falls in battle, it's game over. So you have one unit in your group that you cannot really use because if he's engaged, RNG screws you over, then you could potentially have wasted 30 minutes on a battle or more. This game could be remade with 3 or 4's modern sensibilities and been incredible. But as it is, the remake is a missing opportunity. It's not a bad game, it's just difficult to go back to considering how far the genre, even the series, has progressed. Now, here is where things get a little weird, as Front Mission has 2 types of entries. All the numbered titles are strategy RPGs and are related to one another in story. But the series has several spin-off titles that move into other genres. The next game, for example, subtitled Gun Hazard, is the first spin-off. It swaps genres and is more of a mech run-and-gun. This game is very reminiscent of the aforementioned Assault Suits Vulcan, or Cybernator if you played it here in America. In fact, playing them back-to-back, Gun Hazard feels more like an Assault Suits sequel than a Front Mission one. Indeed, the story happens in an alternate timeline and is not even related to the main series plot in any way. I was not even sure if I should include the game in the video, since they are both published by Square. G-Craft did not develop this game. Instead, it was developed by Omaya Soft, the several of the staff from Masaya on hand to program and plan the game. I decided to include it anyway because I am sure someone in the comments would ask about it. Putting them side by side, you can see the similarities, and they feel very similar to play. In short, it is related to the franchise in name and publisher only. Both these games are very fun though, and if you can, I recommend you give them a try. The Assault Suit Lanos got a remake published by Sedesco a few years back on PS4, and it's definitely worth your time to go back and see where this series started with more modern sensibilities. Going back to G-Craft though, they were gearing up for their next release on the PlayStation, Ark the Lad. Around 1995, Square shifted their focus from the Nintendo to PlayStation. And we all know why, because of the CDs and all that, so I won't go back and beleaguer that story for you. However, a great deal of the games coming out in the early days of the console felt more like upscaled SNES games rather than fully fledged 32-bit generation games. And this is because they started development for the SNES and then moved over to the PlayStation. Ark the Lad falls into this group. To be clear, this is not a criticism. I think that style is pretty cool. However, it did create some problems early on for the North American release. Sony and Sega in the early days tended not to release any games in the North American market for the 32-bit hardware unless they featured some sort of 3D graphics. Despite the demand for games like Ark the Lad and the vocal fan community calling for its game's release in North America, it didn't get that release until 2002. The now very famous Working Designs company handled the port, and the game was released as a compilation containing 4 Ark the Lad games. You play as Ark, a lad burdened with the destiny to save the world. The gameplay is a tactical RPG, but it is very streamlined compared to its contemporaries, less menu-driven and less spectacle. The upside to all this no-nonsense presentation is the speed at which battles and actions progress. It is refreshing compared to something like Shining the games and the Tactics games. Again, not saying those are bad, but this feels simpler, and it plays that aspect as a strength. I could see why a lot of fans latched onto it back in the day. It was followed quickly by 2 sequels, which expanded on the lore, world, and mechanics, and a monster training simulator spin-off called Ark the Lad Monster and Casino Game. All these games were released together in 2002 in the Working Designs compilation that I already mentioned. Front Mission 2 came out after the second Ark the Lad game. This game was also a Japanese exclusive release. Like the first numbered game in the series, it has never been released in North America, but it is getting a remake on the Switch. I did attempt to play an English patched version of this game, but the patch is only partially translated, and a lot of the cutscenes are still in Japanese. The story follows three main characters, Ash, Thompson, and Lisa, part of the OCU forces in Al-Daresh, formerly Bangladesh, in the wake of the Second Hoffman conflict. 12 years prior, the country had been spiraling into unrest and seeking independence. The game opens when liberation forces storm the base where our three heroes are stationed. In the fury of battle, our trio of heroes are forced to flee. The game follows their struggle to leave the country and find out what mysterious force is pulling the strings behind the scenes. The game feels even slower than its predecessor due to more cinematic focus for cutscenes and even turns in battle. Each of these has to load from the PlayStation disc, and more still, each is pretty embellished compared to those in the other entries of the franchise. What results is a game that is technically very impressive and for its time looks great on the PlayStation. However, in execution, it bogs down in a hurry, mainly due to the slow loading. Front Mission 2 also marks the end for G-Craft as an independent developer. During the game's production, Square offered to buy out the company, and a deal was struck. G-Craft became Square's sixth product development division. From here on, we will largely focus on the games in the Front Mission series, but we will mention other interesting titles produced by Division 6 and Toshiro himself. Front Mission Alternate is the second spin-off title in the series, and like Gun Hazard, is in a totally different genre. This time, it's an RTS. The game is developed by Square Division 7 alongside Front Mission 2. Like Gun Hazard, the story is considered an alternate history and non-canon to the main numbered titles. It has never been released outside of Japan, and I was not able to play it for this review. RTSs have never really been my cup of tea anyway, so I'm not sure I will ever get around to playing it, but it still looks interesting to you. I would say give it a try. This brings us neatly to Front Mission 3. As I stated already, this game rocks. It finally hammers out all the kinks in the previous games and adds a few more elements that make it really stand out. You play as Kazuki and Ryogo, two Japanese youths who are test pilots for a Wanzers development company in Japan. Set 10 years after the second numbered entry, the OCU is still reeling from the events of the prior conflict. Kazuki and Ryogo find themselves in a lot of trouble looking for Kazuki's adopted sister, Alyssa. The game has two completely different story campaigns that are tied to a choice early on in the game. The game is also much more replayable due to the ability to skip cutscenes and speed up battles with the push of a button. The game can be tailored to your preferences using the infinitely customizable options of the Wanzers, parts, and weapons. Want to play the whole game using melee weapons? Sure, no problem. Different characters can be unlocked depending on how you play the scenarios as well. Every time I come back to the game, I find something new to enjoy about it. Also introduced is the web browser. No joke, the game has a fictional World Wide Web that you can log into, check your emails, or browse web pages. Here you can expand your knowledge of the lore or even find good deals on weapons. A remake is scheduled for 2023, and I'll be getting it day one. Just hope they don't mess it up. Front Mission 4 came out on the PS2 in 2003 and improves on its predecessor in the gameplay department. Links are the bread and butter of the battle system, and the player has a lot of control over these combo actions. You can link your attacks with other members of your squad to deal out major damage to the enemy. The story follows two squads, one in Europe and one in South America. The story has lower stakes than Part 3, and is quite a bit shorter, but this time there's a full cast of voice actors who all do a tremendous job of bringing the game to life. The game is a lot of fun, and there are more customization options than ever. Players new to the series might be overwhelmed by all the options, and consulting a guide is a must if you want to get the most mileage out of the game. Some of the weapons are incredibly fun to use, and you can unlock them by completing certain side missions or also training exercises or simulator missions. I did find myself farming for money a lot more in this game than the other three, but as fun as the combat was, that's never really a problem. I still think 3 is my favorite of the two, but it is not by much, and I'll be definitely coming back to this game very soon. 4 was followed up by 3 Japan exclusives, Front Mission Online and Front Mission 5, both for the PlayStation 2, and Front Mission 2089. Online was, as the name implies, an MMO third-person shooter. 5 being a numbered entry builds on the mechanics of 4, and 2089 was at first a mobile game styled after the original Front Mission. 2089 was released later on the DS, but that was also a Japanese exclusive. As for right now, 5 is the last numbered entry in the franchise. There have been 2 titles that did come to North America since, but neither of them were developed by Toshiro and his team. Front Mission Evolved was an attempt to reboot the series, similar in mechanics to Online, although not an MMO. Left Alive is the last game to come out in the Front Mission universe, but despite being in the same world, you do not play in the mechs, and the game is a third-person shooter with Metal Gear Solid vibes. Though by all accounts, it is a much poorer executed experience than the famous stealth game. And that's pretty much it for Front Mission as of right now. There is some hope with the recent remakes, and indeed, I'm very much excited for Front Mission 3's remake. That said, there are other G-Craft Division 6 games to cover, as well as the career of Toshiro himself, so we'll wrap up the video with a segment on both. Division 6 continued until Square Enix's restructuring in 2009. They developed mostly Front Mission games, but a few notable games not in the franchise are Another Mind and Blue Wing Blitz. Another Mind was a bizarre experimental FMV game. You play as another mind, literally appearing in the consciousness of a 16-year-old girl after she wakes up from a horrible accident. The player and the girl named Hitomi communicate with each other. The player does not have direct control over Hitomi and has to communicate commands to them to solve the mysteries and finish the game. Blue Wing Blitz returns to the Division's roots in a turn-based tactical RPG for the Wonder Swan. The difference, though, is this time you are in stylized airplanes instead of mechs. The game looks great, but I have no idea how to play it since it's all in Japanese and doesn't have currently a fan translation patch. As far as Toshiro Tsuchida, he worked on 3 Final Fantasy games as a battle planner and on Monster AI. Specifically, he is responsible for the amazing turn-based system in Final Fantasy X, but he also worked on 11 and 13. He was also a producer for the WiiWare Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles game, My Life as King. My analytics have been telling me that you guys really like these developer retrospective video types, so I'm going to try to do more of them. If you like this one, I have a couple more that you can view by clicking this playlist. I want to thank every one of you for watching these developer retrospectives. Until next time, God bless.